Thanks to Rand for organizing this conference, and thanks to all of you for attending. We didn't coordinate our remarks, and I hope we don't overlap too much, but we do agree, Steve and I. In October 2001, let's remember, a small number of U.S. personnel working in tandem with local Afghans entered Afghanistan with a clear aim: to degrade al-Qaeda's ability to carry out another 9/11-style attack and to punish the Taliban regime that harbored them. Over the past 8 years, we've seen those objectives shift to a much broader set of objectives and goals, including promoting capable, effective governance in Kabul, providing aid and other forms of development assistance, and cracking down on the cultivation of illegal narcotics, which of course cuts against goal number 2. The extent to which the mission has shifted away from its original punitive aim was affirmed in September when General McChrystal explained that the new strategy must be forged to earn the support of the Afghan people, regardless of how many militants are killed or captured. But such an undertaking, as Steve alluded, amounting to a large-scale social engineering project, is unwarranted. The costs in blood and treasure that we would have to incur, in addition to what we have already paid, are not outweighed by the benefits, even if one accepts the most optimistic estimates of the likelihood of success. If the Obama administration goes along with General McChrystal's request, which I believe that they will, for more troops, and therefore chooses to spend additional money on this mission, the administration is saying, in effect, that an expanded troop presence will do more to prevent a repeat of 9/11 than if the money had been spent on countless other missions and programs ostensibly directed to the same purpose. Well, count me a skeptic, and I'm not a big fan of a lot of the other things that we do to fight counterterrorism, as you might know. There is considerable evidence, however, that a large-scale, open-ended troop presence is counterproductive to fighting terrorism. Meanwhile, there have been a number of highly effective counterterrorism programs that cost far less and require a far less obtrusive military presence on the ground. Now, advocates of a larger troop presence, and we've heard from some of them today, allege that there are simply no alternatives, none, to a full-scale, population-centric counterinsurgency strategy. They contend that the counterterrorism approach has been tried and failed. And they give even less credence to the notion that a reasonably effective strategy could be crafted for a fraction of the cost of their approach. Well, as an aside, I find it inconceivable that the most prosperous country on the planet, a country that boasts a state-of-the-art military whose annual R&D budget for military spending is greater than the entire defense budgets of most countries, would ever have no alternatives. But that is what we are told. In this case, there is an alternative. We can continue to pursue our core objectives in Afghanistan without an enormous military presence on the ground. The process begins by revisiting the mission and refining our objectives. The core question is not whether the war is winnable. Anything is winnable so long as you retain the ability to define the difference between victory and defeat, and we still do. And so long as you're able to mobilize at will, the resources necessary to sustain the mission until that victory, however you define it, is achieved. More important is the question of whether the mission is essential to U.S. national security interests, a necessary component of a broader strategy to degrade al-Qaeda's ability to carry out another 9/11-style attack, or has it become an interest of itself? We must win the war because it's the war we are in. Judging from most contemporary commentary today, I contend it has become the latter. Thus have our war aims expanded so much to the point where we are not serving ends related directly to our core security objectives. So I say again, we must narrow our focus. We don't need a large-scale, long-term presence to degrade al-Qaeda's capacity in Afghanistan. And if you doubt that the current mission in Afghanistan is no longer chiefly about degrading al-Qaeda's ability to carry out future operations against the United States, consider the following. Al-Qaeda isn't in Afghanistan. In an interview earlier this month, National Security Advisor James Jones noted that the maximum estimate is less than 100 operating in Afghanistan. This tiny number of individuals, he went on to say, had no bases, no ability to launch attacks on either us or our allies. In recent testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, terrorism expert Mark Sageman agreed. He noted al-Qaeda's difficulty in recruiting new talent and maintaining quality within its upper echelons. Protection of the Western homeland, Sageman explained, involves an effective strategy of containment of the threat in the Afghan-Pakistan area until it disappears for internal reasons. Containing those who travel to Pakistan for terrorist training is a counterterrorism problem and is a much easier problem to solve than transforming an adjacent nation through a national counterinsurgency strategy. He concluded, the proposed counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan is at present irrelevant to the goal of disrupting, dismantling, and defeating al-Qaeda. Well, Sageman can obviously be counted as a critic of our current counterinsurgency strategy, but even the defenders of COIN admit that it is essentially irrelevant to fighting al-Qaeda. Stephen Biddle, writing in The American Interest earlier this year, concludes that preventing Afghanistan from ever becoming a haven for terrorism against the United States is the weakest argument for waging the kind of war we are now waging. He goes on, we've already noted that the denying a sanctuary could be, they could achieve a sanctuary in many, many other places. But the most trenchant and pointed critique that I've come across recently was an article by Simon Jenkins in The Guardian earlier this week. Quote, "The excuse that we are preventing another 9/11 is ludicrously thin. That event, whose plotting and training were in Europe and America, will cause the U.S. to spend what Congress puts at a staggering $1.3 trillion in wars and related security by 2019, and still no one has arrested bin Laden. It must be the most extravagant punitive expedition to the Asian mainland since Agamemnon set off for Troy." I'm glad I got a laugh out of that, because I blogged about this and I predicted that most people wouldn't understand the reference, but I'm glad that most of the people in this audience do. Credit to all of you. In short, what we've seen over the past 8 years is a classic case of mission creep. The United States cannot transform what is a deeply divided, poverty-stricken, tribal-based society into a self-sufficient, cohesive, and stable electoral democracy. We cannot. And even if Americans did commit several 100,000 troops, as COIN Doctrine's own guidelines stipulate, success would hardly be guaranteed, as Steve pointed out. Of course, it's unreasonable to guarantee success in times of war. Planning will always fall short of our expectations. No one can reliably predict the future, but we should be especially wary of ambitious state-building efforts. Most such projects fail. The prospects in Afghanistan are far more bleak. As the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations stated in an August 2009 report, unlike Iraq, Afghanistan is not a reconstruction project, it is a construction project, starting almost from scratch in a country that will probably remain poverty-stricken no matter how much the United States and the international community accomplish in the coming years. Washington's hope for nation building and counterinsurgency, particularly as they are being applied toward Afghanistan, is not so much misguided as it is misplaced. Containing al-Qaeda and disrupting its ability to carry out future terrorist attacks does not require a massive troop presence on the ground. Committing still more U.S. personnel to Afghanistan undermines the already weak authority of the Afghan leaders, interferes with our ability to deal with other security challenges elsewhere in the world, and pulls us deeper into a bloody and protracted guerrilla war with no end in sight. So, to sum up, what is the alternative? Containment, as the title of this panel implies, a far smaller U.S. military presence pursuing a much narrower set of objectives. It starts with a different mindset, I would argue, about how we interact with Afghans. And I go back to a Washington Post op-ed earlier this year published by Arthur Keller, former CIA case officer in Pakistan. He reminded us of the legendary CIA operator Bill Lair's lessons from Laos. Quote, "Keep your footprint small. Don't ever let the locals think mighty America will fight their battles or solve their problems for them. Focus on getting them ready to fix their own problems." Keller concludes, this is not a war we can win ourselves. The Afghans are going to have to win it by fighting to retake their own country from both Taliban thugs and corrupt government officials. Doing too much for a weak ally can be just as bad as doing too little. Well, I agree. For the time being, the advocates of an open-ended and very large-scale troop presence in Afghanistan have the upper hand, and I, like Steve, hope that we are both wrong in predicting that the Obama administration will miss an opportunity to substantially rethink our objectives there. An expanded mission fails a simple cost-benefit test. Even if we were to make a decades-long commitment to creating a state in Afghanistan, success would be far from certain. As with all foreign policies, this enormous effort must be weighed against the opportunity costs. Money, troops, and other resources would be poured into Afghanistan at the expense of other national priorities, both foreign and domestic. There will be no shortage of calls for more troops to be sent to Afghanistan. Indeed, some of the leading advocates for the disastrous war in Iraq, some of whom have spoken here today, routinely declare that any talk of narrowing our objectives anywhere is synonymous with defeat. Such claims demonstrate a profound lack of understanding of America's tolerance for open-ended missions with ill-defined goals. More importantly, a disdain for a focused strategy that balances ends, ways, and means betrays an inability to think strategically about the range of challenges facing us today. After having already spent 8 years in Afghanistan, committing still more troops there would only weaken our ability to deal with security challenges elsewhere. Accordingly, we should be looking for ways to extricate ourselves militarily from Afghanistan, not excuses to dig a deeper hole. Thank you.